Number 10, 9 lives. Animals have long been used to smuggle items into prisons. Typically, however, it's birds. Birds can be used to smuggle substances or cell phones, mobile devices, but what if a prisoner needs something more substantial? After all, a pigeon can only carry so much weight, but a cat? A cat could carry a lot of things. In Brazil, officials found a cat sneaking onto the prison grounds that was loaded down with an impressive amount of gear with which someone could stage a prison break. The poor animal had been saddled with 2 saws, 2 concrete drills, a cell phone complete with charger, batteries, and a headset. There was also a memory card. Apparently, the cat had been seen on the grounds many times before heading in and out, and they assumed one of the inmates had trained it. After the gear was removed, they took it to a shelter. Number 9, a pet rabbit. Is everything smuggled into jail for nefarious purposes? Not necessarily. Just because it's prohibited doesn't always mean it's something like substances or weapons or cell phones. Some inmates just want to have a friend, like the guy who was discovered with a pet rabbit. In the UK, back in 2014, an inmate was discovered to be hiding a contraband rabbit that he was keeping as a pet. That's nice and all, but what is he feeding it? They even constructed a hutch for it to live in, which shows some commitment. The domesticated rabbit had been found by prisoners who were working outside and decided to take it home with them. The experience was short-lived, and within several days, the rabbit was discovered and sent to an animal rescue. Poor guy got his buddy taken from him. I kind of feel bad. Number 8, karaoke. Karaoke is one of those things that you're either into or you're really not. But some people who are into it are really into it. So much so that even being in prison can't stop them from bursting out their best Drake impression and singing Hotline Bling. Indonesia's Ardalita Suryani was a businesswoman who got 5 years in prison for bribery charges. Whatever she had initially been charged with, she offered the prosecutor $600,000 to drop it. It didn't work out. But lucky for her, she got to put $600,000 to better use, which in this case meant a heck of a suite in prison. Indonesia's prison system is a little shadier than it should be, and that means officials are more open to bribes than they should be. When a TV crew accompanied officials on a surprise inspection, they discovered Suryani's prison cell was basically a luxury apartment. She had sofas and a flat-screen TV, and also a staff. There was a nanny working for her, taking care of the child that also lived in her prison cell. And while Suryani herself was in a different cell getting a laser beauty treatment, officials discovered that she had an adjoining cell that had been converted into a karaoke suite. Number 7, Pruno wine. Are you really in prison if you don't experience Pruno at least once? This prison toilet wine has been around for years and is a testament to an inmate's ingenuity and also a complete lack of self-preservation. It's a beverage fermented from literally anything a prisoner can scrounge up that may or may not make you go blind when you drink it. The CDC also warns that it might contain botulism. There's no typical Pruno recipe, but it can involve anything from apples and oranges to fruit cups and even ketchup packets. Basically, you need a fruit or vegetable base with some sugar and water, and then slices of bread to provide some yeast to help the fermentation process. Let it sit in a bag for a while and it becomes alcoholic. Finding it in prison isn't all that rare. It's contraband and not allowed, but it happens. However, prisoners at the Santa Rita jail in California went all out in 2020 ahead of a planned Super Bowl party. Officials confiscated bags and bags of the stuff, several hundred gallons of it in fact. No word on if it was the biggest Pruno haul ever, but it had to be up there. Number 6, a homemade computer. Prisoners have access to computers these days for things like learning and even writing correspondence if they so choose. They're limited in what they can do, of course, and internet access is strictly controlled. Of course, that's just when people follow the rules, and it's safe to assume you can't always expect inmates to follow rules. In 2017, officials in Ohio discovered that inmates had built their own computer and hidden it in the ceiling. The prison had a program that allowed inmates to break down old electronics for recycling. Two inmates working together had stolen bits and pieces while at work until they had enough to make a new computer. Their toy was discovered when officials noticed that a computer on their network had exceeded a daily internet usage threshold. Not only had they built a computer, they got onto the prison's network with it. When it was discovered, officials found recipes for substances, adult content, applications for credit cards, and many more. Number 5, an electric guitar. Obviously, most of the stuff that qualifies as crazy is also illegal. It's mind-blowing to see what prisoners can either smuggle or build. But every once in a while, a perfectly legal and sanctioned item gets produced, and it's so amazing it deserves some recognition. That's the case with Norman Lockamy's electric guitar. Handmade in a prison wood shop, the guitar was named Lady and featured an oak body and a maple headstock. Apparently, 1 or 2 items used to finish the guitar were perhaps not 100% prison approved, but it seems like he got away with it since the contraband items were just guitar parts used to make an actual guitar. The end result was an absolute piece of art that looks like something you'd see hanging on the wall of your local guitar shop, and it sounded amazing too. Number 4, paper heads. In a historical context, these papier-mâché heads, created by Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin, are some of the most amazing things ever discovered in a prison. They were simple constructs made of toilet paper and soap. The prisoners crafted them in secret during their time in Alcatraz. They used paint from the prison maintenance shop, and they even stole hair from the floor of the prison barber to make them as real as possible. And why would anyone do such a thing? Well, to escape, of course. The 3 men plotted their escape back in 1962. Each one designed a head to put on the pillow of their prison bed. With the covers pulled up, a passing guard would glance in, see a head on the pillow, and assume each man was asleep as he should be. It was so dumb that it was actually genius. The men escaped out of a utility door and used an improvised raft to leave the island. The men were never seen again, and the FBI concluded that they probably drowned. But that's never been proven either. The heads have begun to fall apart in recent years, so 3D scans were taken to preserve them as items of historical significance. Number 3, adult workers. Of all the things you can smuggle into a prison, one of the hardest has to be an actual human. Those are super noticeable, obviously. But if you're crafty enough, you can pull it off. And Florida, because it's always Florida, learned this lesson the hard way when they discovered adult workers in a maximum security facility. And it happened more than once. So how does one get an adult worker into prison without anyone noticing? That involved some lying. In this case, a lawyer for an inmate needs to show up with a paralegal to visit a client. So far, so legal. Things get shifty when it becomes clear that the lawyer is not being honest and the paralegal is no paralegal at all. Apparently, all a lawyer needs to do is sign a form to claim anyone as their assistant, and that is perfectly legal. So, they were bringing in women who had no legal training and were literally just there to entertain the inmates. They'd get a private room because of attorney-client privilege, and the women would strip and give lap dances and such. Several of the women were caught, one performing in solitary confinement, while another was actually having intimate relations with an inmate in a meeting room. Number 2, a glider. It is an acknowledged duty of any prisoner of war to try to escape. Often this is much easier said than done, especially for POWs who often face much harsher conditions than normal prisoners. But it has also led to some amazing efforts to accomplish that goal. During WW2, British POWs being held at O-Flag IVC, otherwise known as Colditz Castle, were working on their own escape plan. The entire thing hinged on one of the most amazing creations ever to emerge from behind prison walls, a glider. One of the prisoners realized that the roof of the chapel was obscured from sight on the ground. They could do anything up there without any of the people seeing them, and that included launching a glider to get them over the walls and past the river outside. The library of the castle had a book on aircraft design, and the team set to work. They strapped it together from a variety of purloined parts, including floorboards, sheets, and even porridge to seal holes. The prison was actually liberated by American forces before the Brits got a chance to use the glider. Only one photo of the glider plus hand-drawn plans survived. A replica was made years later and flown by remote control off of the roof. It worked like a charm and made it all the way across the river. Number 1, improvised weapons. A shotgun made from iron bedposts. Charge made of pieces of lead from curtain tape and match heads to be ignited by AA batteries and a broken light bulb. On May 21st, 1984, 2 inmates of a prison in Celle, Germany, took a jailer as a hostage, showed off their firepower by letting go at a pane of bulletproof glass, and escaped by car. A shiv designed as a wooden crucifix, found in an inmate cell in Wolfenbüttel prison, Germany, sometime around 1994, intended for use in an escape or as a general weapon. At that time, a lot of crucifixes were fashioned in prison woodshops until jailers finally figured out their true purpose. Another weapon is a double-barreled pistol. This gun was found along with other homemade firearms in the cell of 2 Celle prison inmates on November 15, 1984. The weapons had been made in the prison's metal workshop. They were loaded with pieces of steel and match heads. Coming in at number 10, this graffiti-ridden prison cell in Caracas, Venezuela. This cell is in terrible condition, with many multiple inmates sharing the same room. On the walls are multiple phrases written in Spanish. In big, bold, red letters, Casa de Dios is written, translating to House of God in English. There are multiple other religion-related things written here, like Templo y Morada del Espíritu Santo, which means temple and dwelling of the Holy Spirit. It is reported that these prisons violate all the human rights of the prisoner. At number 9, this wall is covered with 4 names, along with the designation of passed away. The names on the wall, Chalice, Dell, Woods, and Cadell, are the names of prison guards. An inmate at the institution was apparently in a terrible mood the day they wrote this on the wall. The threats were clarified later by the prison that they were actually fake. The story goes that a private company offered sleepover services to people who were interested in living in a cell for a day after the building was abandoned. Many people ended up scribbling on the walls and pretending they were inmates. At number 8, one piece of rebellious art on a wall in Ilha San Lucas prison. The prison island is also known as Devil's Island by the inmates. They were often treated poorly and were so far away from civilization that it drove some of the inmates crazy. One inmate drew an anarchy symbol onto one of the walls, exclaiming the disdain for the prison system in Costa Rica. The walls are also covered in explicit content, reflecting the loneliness they faced while incarcerated at the island. At number 7, Burlington County Prison in New Jersey. On the walls of this prison there are many chilling things written, one of them being an image of Jesus, which is being restored along with the writing under it. Burlington County is trying to preserve the art written on the walls, and is doing so by hiring an art conservationist to restore the art on the walls. The writing on the walls says this, from what I can tell. God, frail creatures are we all, but the fewer faults to thyself, and leave the rest to God. Thy conscience, and what, I wonder? What could the inmate be saying here? Let us know what you think in the comments. At number 6, once again at Burlington County Prison in New Jersey, another chilling image along with some choice words were written here. The image is now extremely worn out, but used to be a drawing of an eye, with the iris being drawn in detail, showing its characteristic line pattern. Under the eye, the words, "We're watching you, you can't get out," are written. Some of the drawings were done all the way back in 1955, when the whole prison was repainted for the last time, leaving the prisoners a canvas for their creativity. At number 5, this piece of prison graffiti was written in the 1600s. This chilling piece of graffiti is located in Palazzo Chiaramante Steri. It was built as a palace in the early 14th century, but it was used by the Inquisition as both a tribunal and a prison between 1600 and 1782. Conveying centuries of Sicilian history, this is one of the symbols of Palermo. The prisoner's art includes this magnificently ominous piece. It's a depiction of many key figures from the Bible being led out of the maw of a giant dragon-like creature by what looks to be an angel with a scythe and a scribbled off face. The wall includes things written in Latin as well. Creepy. At number 4, we have the gallows at Windsor Jail. Gallows, for those who aren't aware, are the section of the prison dedicated to those who are extremely devious and are sentenced to be executed by rope. The words written on the wall of an 89-year-old prison cell say, 378. We're moving southwest, so don't hang around. This is a chilling joke written by an inmate at the prison and was discovered by someone when decommissioning the prison and relocating the prisoners. This shows clearly the mental state of the prisoners there, knowing full well that they would meet their demise in the near future, and coming to terms with it so well that they joke about it. At number 3, a political statement carved into a prison wall. In Richmond Castle, 1,916 prisoners were held there for being British conscientious objectors during WW1. The statement says something that was very thought-provoking and radical at the time it was written. The only war which is worth fighting is the class war. The working class of this country has no quarrel with the working class of Germany or any other country. Socialism stands for internationalism. If the workers of all countries united and refused to fight, there would be no war. At number 2, we have this piece of literature that threatens snitches. Snitching is to tell the police of certain illegal activities concerning other people in their group to save oneself. Notoriously, snitches make plea deals with police and the legal system to receive less jail time than they would have for their crime for reporting the others. However, once in prison, if someone finds out you're a snitch, it made you an easy target for people who value honor and respect. The sentence on the wall reads, "Doing time is a blessing, unless you're a dog and do some confessing." Let's hope whoever wrote that never came across a snitch. At number 1, this wall is inside an abandoned prison. It is said by one person who was working in an isolated area of the prison that it is an extremely creepy place. He spent his whole day away from tourists and visitors, sitting on the deserted floor and thinking about what happened in the prison before everyone abandoned it. That's when he found this message on the wall: "We will be back," written in black, faintly on the wall. The prison said this in a blog post: "Spending so much time in a historic prison has made me think about what Michael Mayerfeld Bell calls the ghosts of place." In his 1997 paper, he is not speaking of ghosts per se, but rather the impact of resonances of places and our connections, or lack of them, to them, and how this impacts on the human experiences of place. After all, we are not robots. We feel strong emotional connections to some places, mild interest and even distaste towards others. But does this impact how we explore them? How we study them? How we try and understand them? It seems almost like the author of the blog post was driven crazy himself. Number 10. The outlandish escape from a Mexican prison. Joel David Kaplan was a New York businessman who had been arrested for execution in 1962 in Mexico City and was incarcerated at the Santa Martha Acatitla prison in the Iztapalapa borough of Mexico City. Joel's sister, Judy Kaplan, arranged the means to help Kaplan escape, and on August 19th, 1971, a helicopter landed in the prison yard. The guards mistakenly thought this was an official visit. In 2 minutes, Kaplan and his cellmate Carlos Antonio Contreras, a Venezuelan counterfeiter, were able to board the craft and were piloted away before any shots were fired. Both men were flown to Texas, and then different planes flew Kaplan to California and Castro to Guatemala. The Mexican government never initiated extradition proceedings against Kaplan. The escape is told in a book, The 10-Second Jailbreak, the helicopter escape of Joel David Kaplan. It also inspired the 1975 action movie Breakout. At number 9, the escape of 3 Irish Republican Army members. On October 31st, 1973, an IRA member hijacked a helicopter and forced the pilot to land in the exercise yard of Dublin's Mountjoy Jail's D Wing at 3:40 p.m. 3 members of the IRA were able to escape: J.B. O'Hagan, Seamus Toomey, and Kevin Mallon. Another prisoner who also was in the prison was quoted as saying, "One shamefaced screw apologized to the governor and said he thought it was the new Minister for Defense. I told him it was our Minister of Defense leaving." The Mountjoy helicopter escape became Republican lore and was immortalized by the helicopter song, which contains the lines, "It's up like a bird and over the city. There's 3 men missing, I heard the warder say." Number 8. On November 3rd, 2019, Samuel Fonseca, 21, and Jonathan Salazar, 20, both convicted convicted executioners escaped from Monterey County Jail, located in Salinas, California. The two men escaped after using a hard plastic cleaning brush to knock a hole in the restroom sheetrock ceiling. The hole was in a blind spot in the communal bathroom that could only be seen by someone inside the restroom. They then escaped by going through the 11-inch wide hole, then through a maintenance gap between walls, and finally out a hatch that was kicked open, with the cameras nearby blocked by recent construction. After they escaped, they took off their jail suit. They were wearing street clothes underneath that allowed them to blend in as they headed to Tijuana, Mexico. Fonseca and Salazar had been in rival gangs and were not known to associate with each other before being housed in the same unit of the jail. Similarly, it is unknown why the two headed for Tijuana, how they made the 7-hour trip, and why they tried to re-enter the United States from Mexico around midnight 3 days after their escape, only to be arrested by the US Marshals on the border. Fonseca was accused of executing 2 men over 3 days in Salinas in June 2018. Salazar was arrested in the October 2017 shooting and passing of a Salinas man and the wounding of the man's wife while the couple drove in a Salinas neighborhood. Number 7. The escape involving what guards thought was an impossible stunt. In 1921, at age 22, Victor Folk Nelson made a sensational and highly publicized run and escape from a line of 13 prisoners after attending chapel at the Charleston State Prison. Despite an attempted intervening tackle from a prisoner trustee and bullets from a guard's gun, Nelson ran some distance, leapt, caught the lower end of the window bars, and scaled the 40-foot high wall of the prison's Cherry Hill section. At the top of the wall, he performed what was always believed an impossible stunt, throwing his body across a 10-foot space to the wall, where he managed to catch hold of the coping of a nearby structure and then to drop 30 feet down to the Boston and Maine railroad tracks. He was convinced to volitionally return to prison by his respected mentor and progressive penologist. His mentor was the only one to know of his whereabouts, meaning no one but Osborne found him until he turned himself in. Number 6. The infamous escape from Alcatraz. On June 11th, 1962, Frank Morris and the brothers John and Clarence Anglin, 3 inmates of the Alcatraz maximum security federal prison located on an island in San Francisco Bay, pulled off one of the greatest prison escapes in American history. After months of planning, they squeezed through air vents and made their way into the Pacific Ocean, where they boarded a raft they'd made out of stolen raincoats. They were never seen again. But their raft and paddles washed up ashore. Many believe the men drowned in the icy waters. The Anglin family insists the brothers survived and have presented evidence to prove it. The FBI can't quite figure out what to believe. Number 5. The only person to ever successfully escape and remain hidden from New York State Prison. On February 6, 1997, Victor Figueroa, a convict serving 1 to 4 years for substance possession, was supposed to be on the way to the mess hall when he wandered off from the Maria Shock incarceration facility. As soon as his absence was noticed, authorities secured the area, but the trail went cold. Authorities believed Figueroa passed away during the escape, most likely in a fall through a mine shaft near the facility. All anyone knows for sure is Figueroa was never seen or heard from again, and he's the only New York State prison inmate to escape and never be found. Number 4. In 1987, Glenn Stewart Godwin escaped from Folsom State Prison in California. He was serving a lengthy sentence for execution. According to the FBI, the agency still has him on its most wanted list. Later that year, he was arrested for substance trafficking in Mexico and sent to prison in Guadalajara. In 1991, he allegedly executed a fellow inmate and escaped yet again. He goes by a number of aliases, including Michael Carrera, Nigel Lopez, and Dennis Harold McWilliams, and is believed to be somewhere in Central or South America. The FBI is offering a $20,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. He has never been found and could still be out there right now. Number 3. On June 1st, 1971, Leonard Rain Moses escaped after being granted a furlough from prison to attend his grandmother's funeral in the Homewood section of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. At the time, he was serving a life sentence for execution in connection with the Pittsburgh riots of 1968 that followed the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Moses remains at large and is still considered armed and dangerous. The FBI is offering a reward up to $10,000 for information leading directly to the arrest of Moses. This one is crazy. Imagine using your grandmother's funeral to escape from prison. I'm not sure if that's crazy or kinda smart. Number 2. The escape of a crime ring king. Omid Nino Tavili was the head of a Persian organized crime network in Canada. In 2007, while in custody, Tavili walked out of a maximum security prison in Canada's British Columbia wearing a janitor's uniform. He had the assistance of a guard whom he'd bribed to look the other way. The guard, whom Tavili never paid, was prosecuted, but Tavili remains an international fugitive. Tavili is also wanted in the United States in connection with a fraudulent telemarketing business that targeted the elderly. In 2016, 2017, Tavili, who is now almost 40, may have called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to negotiate his return to custody in exchange for a promise not to extradite him to the United States. And at number 1, a man with a plan. On August 22nd, 1970, George Edward Wright first escaped from a New Jersey prison. He was caught and put back in prison, only to escape again in 1972, and then he came up with a plan to avoid being re-imprisoned. On July 31st, 1972, Wright and accomplices hijacked a Delta airplane. After collecting ransom and releasing the passengers, Wright and his crew flew the plane to Algiers. In 2011, the police caught up with him in Portugal. Since Portugal has no extradition treaty with the United States, Wright was released and remains at large. Number 10, Timothy Joseph McGee. A convicted serial executioner and Toonerville Reefa 13 gang member from the Atwater Village neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. He is alleged to be responsible for at least 12 executions between 1997 and 2001, 3 of which led to convictions. McGee is also suspected of at least 10 attempted executions, 4 of which led to convictions. In 2018, the Los Angeles Times named McGee one of the top 20 most notorious executioners in the history of California, a list that included the likes of Charles Manson, the Golden State Butcher, and the Night Stalker. This guy was definitely placed in a high security prison. They're mostly reserved for the worst of the worst, like multiple slaughterers and escapees. If this guy was on my cell block, I think I'd hide. Number 9, Larry Raines. On May 30th, 1964, Larry, posing as a hitchhiker, was given a lift by 30-year-old Gary Albert Smock, a Plymouth school teacher passing through Kalamazoo. During this trip, Raines brandished a weapon and forced Smock to leave the car and climb into the trunk, where he subsequently locked him in. While continuing the trip, Smock attempted to get out of the car, after which Raines stopped the car, tied him up, and then shot him twice in the back of the head. He then stole $3 and other items of material value before leaving the car on the side of the road, where it was discovered a few hours later by a police officer. Over the next few months, Raines told a number of acquaintances about the execution, due to which he was arrested in the early morning of June 5th, 1964, in front of his friend's house. He offered no resistance during his arrest and readily admitted to removing Smock with incriminating evidence, such as a watch and shoes, later identified as belonging to Smock by relatives and friends. When he was taken to the police station, Raines told police that he had executed 4 others during holdups at various gas stations. He confessed to the May 30th execution of 33-year-old Charles E. Snyder in Elkhart, Indiana, the execution of an Air Force serviceman in Paw Paw, Michigan, the execution of a man in Las Vegas, Nevada, and another man in Kentucky. Number 8, we have Bobby Bostic. Bobby Bostic and his friend saw a few people giving presents to the needy around Christmas time, handing out a Christmas tree and an old couch to those who needed it more. Bobby and his friend ran out of the house where they were at, weapons in hand after inhaling substances, and pointed the weapons at a woman taking the cushions from the couch out of her car. A man yelled at them, and so they turned their attention towards the man, who was the woman's boyfriend. After refusing to give money to the pair, Bobby fired at the man, which grazed him thankfully. He handed them his money and the two ran off to find another victim. They found a woman moving packages out of her car into her house when they put the weapon to her head and told her to give them her keys and get in the car. The pair drove off with the woman and robbed her of her possessions before dropping her off at some random alley. They were both arrested an hour later, and Bobby was sentenced to 241 years after denying several plea deals, which could have reduced his sentence by as much as 211 years. He said that as soon as he heard the judge tell him that he would pass in prison, the gravity of the situation suddenly hit him. Number 7, Alfred George Hines. Hines was an amazing escape artist. He escaped from Nottingham prison after sneaking through the locked doors and over a 20-foot prison wall, for which he became known in the press as Houdini Hines. He worked as a builder-decorator in Ireland and throughout Europe until his arrest by detectives of Scotland Yard in 1956, after 248 days as a fugitive. After his arrest, Hines brought a lawsuit against authorities, charging the prison commissioners with illegal arrest, and used the incident as a means to plan his next escape by having a padlock smuggled into him while he was at the law court. 2 guards escorted him to the toilet, but when they removed his handcuffs, Hines bundled the men into the cubicle and snapped the padlock onto screw eyes that his accomplices had earlier fixed to the door. He escaped into the crowd on Fleet Street, but was captured at an airport 5 hours later. Hines would make his 3rd escape from Chelmsford prison less than a year later. He then returned to Ireland, where he lived for 2 years as a used car salesman under the name William Herbert Bishop, before his arrest after being stopped in an unregistered car. Needless to say, they tightened up security around him after all that. Number 6, Antonio Ferreira. Ferreira, 35, who emigrated to France with his family in the 1980s, was in Fresnes prison in Val-de-Marne, having been jailed for bank robbery. He escaped when a gang set fire to cars in the local area to create a diversion, before raking the guard posts with automatic rifles and smashing down the door and interior walls with rocket launchers. They gave Ferreira explosives that allowed him to blow off the bars of his cell. He had previously arranged to commit a minor act of disobedience so as to be placed in a punishment wing, which was well located for his escape. It took 3 days of deliberations for the verdict to be announced at the Cour d'Assises de Paris after a 10-week trial. In total, 18 accomplices were sentenced, while 2 suspects were acquitted. Punishments ranged from suspended sentences to a variety of jail terms, including 4 of 15 years each. The men were convicted of crimes including aiding and abetting escape, destroying goods with explosives, burning cars, and transporting weapons. After the escape, security tightened up around them, often monitored almost 24 hours of the day. Number 5, Jason Barnum. The eyeball man, Jason Barnum, was sentenced to 22 years in prison for shooting an Alaskan police officer. Barnum's offenses were driven by a serious substance addiction, reports The Independent. What made him seem even more dangerous and intimidating was his tattoo-filled visage. Barnum had one of his eyeballs completely tattooed. The shooting happened when police were investigating home burglaries and car thefts. Officers were inspecting a hotel in 2012 when Barnum opened fire from a bathroom. 2 officers shot back, striking Barnum in the arm, and 1 officer was injured. Barnum later admitted to committing thefts and burglaries to feed a substance addiction. Number 4, Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein was an American criminal who spent the last 42 years of his life in prison after being convicted of 4 separate executions while in prison for armed robbery, one of which was overturned. Silverstein spent the last 36 years of his life in solitary confinement for executing corrections officer Merle Klutz at the Marion Penitentiary in Illinois. Prison authorities described him as a brutal executioner and a former leader of the Aryan Brotherhood prison gang. Silverstein maintains that the dehumanizing conditions inside the prison system contributed to the 3 executions he committed. He was held in a specially designed cell in what is called Range 13 at ADX Florence Federal Penitentiary in Colorado. He was the longest held prisoner in solitary confinement within the Bureau of Prisons at the time of his passing. Many prison guards refused to talk to Silverstein out of respect for Klutz. Silverstein was known as the most well-guarded prisoner in the US. Number 3, El Chapo. El Chapo, who is wanted in the United States, has always gotten his way. His appetite for freedom has been described in various psychological reports, and his casual manner of bribing officials is legendary. El Chapo is now under a draconian system with continued surveillance, without any blind spots, dogs, reinforced ground, etc., said Alejandro Hope, former Mexican intelligence agency director. But it is evident that he is going to do all he can to undermine those obstacles. In 2001, Guzman escaped from the Puente Grande prison by hiding inside a laundry cart. 62 prison officials who were paid off were charged for helping him escape. He survived on the run for 8 years, living the life of a rich substance kingpin. Number 2, Robert P. Hansen. Robert P. Hansen was an FBI agent for 25 years, from 1976 to 2001. During that time, he sold thousands of classified documents to Soviet and Russian intelligence, pocketing at least $1.4 million by the time he was caught in 2001. Hansen pled guilty to 14 counts of espionage and 1 of conspiracy to commit espionage, and was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. Hansen's treason was called possibly the worst intelligence disaster in US history by William H. Webster, the chairman of the Commission for the Review of FBI Security Programs. Robert Hansen is currently being held at ADX Florence, where the cells are completely blocked off. Inmates are watched 24/7, and they only get 1 hour out of the cell to work out. At number 1, Michael Swango. Michael Swango was a physician who spent most of the 1980s and 90s using his medical license to poison patients and sometimes colleagues. Despite thoroughly creeping out plenty of people by the time he earned his degree from Southern Illinois University School of Medicine, including being caught faking checkups during OBGYN rotations, Swango secured an internship at what was then known as the Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983. This is where his prolific career as a serial executioner would purportedly begin. It is believed that Swango executed more than 60 people, often by poisoning them with arsenic or intentionally overdosing them with something they were prescribed. Though he could only be charged with 4 executions, Swango was sentenced to life in prison in 2000. He is also spending time at ADX Florence. Talk about a mad doctor, right? Number 10, catching crazy. Ada Barker had been an insane asylum nurse in El Paso, Texas, but in 1902, she became a victim of robbery and it was claimed she lost her senses after the ordeal. Having no immediate family in the area, the police placed the traumatized woman in the county jail until a judge could decide whether to wait until family arrived to claim her or simply send her to the insane asylum. According to the physicians who treated the woman after the robbery, Ada caught the crazy after being a nurse in an insane asylum and not because of the robbery. Number 9, she's not insane. In 1912, former insane asylum nurse Amelie Leonard escaped from the Worcester State Hospital for the insane. Previous to her incarceration in the mental hospital, she had been a nurse there. However, she was also a thief and was caught stealing valuables from the inmates. She was arrested and immediately the doctors said she had to be insane. Remember, nurses were prone to catching the crazy from their patients. Amelie was placed in the asylum, but she was obviously having none of it. One night she put her nightdress over her street clothes and tucked a roll-up blanket into her bed to look like she was asleep. She escaped through the asylum and into the night. Number 8, bad nurses. An almshouse owned by the Marsh family in Massachusetts in 1883 had been taking in paupers and making them care for the insane patients sent to them. It was clearly a disaster. Insane women who were cared for by the pauper nurses endured the worst treatment imaginable. When it came to bathing, it was said that the nurses made half a dozen people bathe in the same water. To be fair, things are not all that great for the pauper nurses, but that's no reason to extend your pain onto others. Number 7, zombie infection insanity? According to one popular theory in the early 1900s, insanity was contagious, like the flu or those fictional zombie movies. For example, in 1907, an insane asylum nurse at the Kings Park Insane Hospital in New York, Nellie Halpin, was bitten by a crazy patient. Shortly afterwards, the young woman showed signs of mental derangement. She was pronounced insane and sent to the psychopathic ward in Bellevue Hospital. I wonder what that deranged behavior was. Number 6, accidental ignition. Oftentimes, nurses lived in rooms provided by the insane asylum. That was the case for Fairy Murphy in 1912. She had been a well-liked nurse at the asylum in North Dakota for 3 years and wanted to brighten the floors in her room. Fairy lit her alcohol stove and began melting paraffin wax, but by some freak accident, her hair caught on fire. She screamed and thrashed, causing her clothing to also light up. Nurses and doctors ran to her aid, but it was too late. After they put out the fire with her bed covers, they saw that her burns were deep and severe. She was not going to live. Being conscious and in extreme pain, Fairy was able to tell her co-workers what had happened and was able to leave a final written message to her mother and sister. Number 5, cutting edge. In 1906, Nurse Wick was doing her job at the Matawan Hospital for Insane Criminals when one of her patients grabbed a pair of scissors and began stabbing her. How this patient got hold of the scissors is unknown. In all probability, patients were at that time allowed to use sharp objects while doing busy work prescribed by the doctors. Sadly, the nurse did not survive the attack and no one really seemed surprised by the inmate's behavior. After all, the inmate had previously ended the lives of her mother, husband, and daughter. Number 4, cruel and unusual. Creedmoor Psychiatric opened in 1912 as the farm colony of Brooklyn State Hospital and is still running in Queens. There are some places that have been abandoned to rot, most notably Building 25, which the hospital ceased using in 1975. This ward gained its reputation from a series of reports documenting brutal treatments of patients. In the 1970s, rumors began to emerge about an abundance of patient abuse, including executions, self-demise, and beatings. In 1984, a nurse's aide hit a patient in the throat with a blackjack. The man, Robert Venegas, was restrained in a straitjacket at the time and passed away due to asphyxiation. The aide had crushed his throat. At number 3, the body stain. Built in 1874 and originally intended for tending to tuberculosis patients, Athens Lunatic Asylum housed patients far over its capacity for many of its functioning years. This overcrowding caused the care for each patient to decrease until the hospital began abusing its patients. Athens, also called the Ridges, is notable because of its famed physician Dr. Walter Jackson. Dr. Jackson was a big fan of the transorbital lobotomy, calling it the cure-all for every mental illness. He performed over 200 lobotomies during his time there. While there were hundreds of passings when the hospital was open, the most famous is that of Margaret Schilling. She went missing while on the ward, and either no one noticed or no one cared. Over a month later, her body was found in a locked room in an abandoned part of the tuberculosis ward. Her body left a gruesome stain on the ward floor that can still be seen today. Number 2, ice therapy. Open to ease the overpopulation of the other 2 mental hospitals in Newtown, Fairfield Hills quickly overcrowded itself and resorted to unconventional methods of treating its patients. Aside from the then normal lobotomies and thorazine prescriptions, this hospital became known for its use of hydrotherapy. You're thinking that's not so bad, right? Not exactly. Used as a calming method, this treatment involved patients being submerged in ice water, sometimes for more than a full day. They were not permitted out, even to relieve themselves. At number 1, shell shock scare. The Trans-Allegheny Hospital opened its doors in 1864, just in time to begin admitting soldiers from the Civil War. At the time, there was no understanding of shell shock or post-traumatic stress. The doctors treated their understandably traumatized patients by doling out lobotomies and other brutal tactics. During the century it was running, thousands of patients passed away there. Most were buried in mass graves on the grounds, and its most famous patient, Charles Mason, lived there in the latter years of the hospital's functioning. After decades of mistreatment and abuse, the Trans-Allegheny closed its doors in 1994. You can now visit the Trans-Allegheny with one of their ghost tours. Maybe don't stay overnight though.